Fighting games are unavoidably weird. New or old, there is always going to be some jank to keep things spicy in the meta. Often in the discourse we focus on these big ideas formed from intentional or unintentional system quirks and the incredible emergent gameplay surrounding them. However, it's not always like that. Sometimes these strays from fighting game conventions aren't huge game defining features, they're just oddities in a sea of normality. So today I'm here with Heather, famed for breaking basically every game predating 2009, and we're going to give you a compilation of nonsense for your entertainment. Let's kick things off with an old faithful, World Warrior. In the version 910129, E Honda's jump neutral heavy kick actually hits low. Yes, a jumping attack that hits low and it knocks down. Fixed immediately in the next version, this has got to be one of the greatest high-low mix-ups of all time. In modern fighters, we see things like empty jump lows, or maybe the game has some air mobility allowing them to hit the ground earlier than expected and go low. However, those are reactable, or at very least have a difference in timing compared to their overhead counterparts, making it easier to defend against. Honda's neutral jump heavy kick does not have this limitation. It's completely unreactable when compared to its overhead attacks, making it a pure 50-50 mix-up. That, because of the knockdown, loops into itself. It's an absolute beast.
New Generation is a very odd game. First of the Street Fighter 3 series was admittedly not a well-received game whatsoever. Littered with bugs, imbalances, and utter nonsense with competitive meta to die on, Ibuki was a shining star in this game's crippled lifespan. One big reason for this was her close roundhouse, a powerhouse of a button in the grand scheme of things. A safe-on-block launcher that would juggle into itself. Now, Street Fighter 3 was a designed game. There was a juggle counter, and we certainly weren't raised in a barn, so surely this button wouldn't have some sinister side effect to it. Well, unfortunately for those of us who weren't, if both hits of close roundhouse hit, the juggle counter would reset and you would be able to micro-walk forward and land another 2 hits of close roundhouse. And then you'd find out it was an infinite and switch the game off immediately. Now, this wasn't all. Ibuki had a multitude of ways of getting this infinite started, her strongest being through her SA3. A full screen, hit confirmable zero-frame launcher that would allow her to link into close roundhouse afterwards. Yeah. I bet you're thankful that the games released after New Generation got released, huh?
Now, there are a lot of weird things to point at in Third Strike, but my favourite is Q's standing animation. Innocuous in appearance, but going from crouching to standing with him is actually throw invulnerable. But why? Well, during this animation, his throw box is actually airborne. Yes, you might not be able to ground throw this, but you can air throw it. So as a Q player, you can tap down and possibly go through a throw if your timing's on point, or potentially low parry an attack. While that sounds amazing, you have to remember he's still one of the weakest characters in the game, but boy, when it works, it looks amazing.
Second Impact was a massive improvement over the unfinished mess that was New Generation. With a completely revamped UI, a much better soundtrack, as well as a lot of additions and fixes to the game's roster, this game is an underrated gem to me. Among these additions is our lovable friend, Hugo, a bottom one mess of a character that unfortunately doesn't hang with any other character in this game. For all of his issues, there's one that's particularly odd. I'm sure you've heard of the Dudley OTG from Third Strike, where a Shoto can forward throw and then hit Dudley with a Shoryu-based super OTG. This wasn't very practical as it was easily beaten by tech rolling and would only be practical if these throws caused a hard knockdown, which they don't. Now what if I told you that in Second Impact the same thing happens to Hugo, but this time it's completely practical. When a Shoto performs a kick throw, they can OTG Hugo for big damage, and this made the Shotos a more threatening grappler than Hugo in that matchup. What made this practical though? If throws cause a hard knockdown? Well, not at all. What made this practical was supers freezing the opponent in their current state. Which means if you do a throw and into a super, Hugo couldn't tech roll out, and it would hit them because of his hurt box still existing when getting knocked down by a kick throw. And it didn't just work with Shoryu's supers. This worked with every super the Shotos had, with the exception of a charged Denjin and Akuma's Raging Demon. Sean could throw Hugo and do SA3 for 50%. An unfortunate oversight for an already more than unfortunate character.
In Alpha 3, moves typically do a very predictable amount of stun according to their strength. Lights do 3, mediums do 6, and heavies do 8. This is their default, however there are exceptions. A considerable amount of moves actually do less than this default, which honestly isn't that strange by modern standards. The amount of stun a move does is often a balancing tool along with its frame data and damage. What makes it weird here is just how drastic the difference is and on what moves. Let's look at a very simple example. Ryu's jump heavy buttons. His jump heavy kick does, as you would expect, 8 points of stun, the default. However, his jump heavy punch does 1 point of stun. Yes, you heard me correctly, 1 single point of stun compared to 8. Now, jump heavy punch is a good button. It can sometimes be anti-airs if you do it early, it can be quite good for deep jump-ins, but is it so comparatively better than jump hard kick, which has longer range, that you need to lower its stun by this amount? Absolutely not. So for this video I ended up creating a spreadsheet charting every single normal move in the game with every single character, trying to find some commonality between these moves that do 1 point of stun, but there really is none. I originally thought this was basically just a heavy nerf on some buttons that appeared strong to the developers at the time of the game's creation. There might be some buttons they missed, of course, but at least we would see what they were trying to do. However, I'm not even sure about that. Adon's standing heavy kick. It's a good button, nothing to write home about, but I could see why you'd initially think it's going to be strong. The move does 3 points of stun. Then we look at Ken and his standing heavy kick, which is comparable. That does the full 8 points of stun. The logic really isn't there. It's just how drastic these changes are. I can understand reducing the stun a little, which they have for some moves, but the ones that do 1 stun sometimes feel completely arbitrary. Sakura's crouching light punch is 1 stun, but her crouching light kick is the default 3. This light kick has better range, is only 1 frame slower, is her combo starter, and is a low. It just doesn't add up. I don't know whether this is a glitch, I just can't tell. It could just be an over nerfing of tools that they thought were going to be strong, like I said before, but if you go to that spreadsheet now and have a look for yourself, the ones that are 1 stun don't really make sense. They're not the moves that we know characters have that are really powerful. They're just random sometimes.
Among many players, at least the ones that haven't played Street Fighter V yet, Gil is a name that strikes fear in the hearts of many, and for good reason. Well, not anyone who knows he's a massive pushover in the first Street Fighter 3 games. Unfortunately for our favorite god, he happens to be very mortal in these games. He's a character with exploits you can just abuse and win off of. A character who gets meterless TOD'd by Hugo and 2i? Everyone seems to get an infinite on him. What could have caused this? The answer is very simple. He can get restood. In New Generation and 2i, there is an oversight in Gil's falling frames. For a short amount of frames, he has a standing hurt box, which is a lot more exploitable in stun, where he can land an infinite with basically every character in the game. Now, most New Generation task videos show off a Gil restand infinite to close the arcade run off. Now, I specifically haven't mentioned something, and it's probably in the back of your mind. What about Resurrection? Well, here's where it gets interesting. Re-Resurrection puts Gil in a stunned state, which means anyone could restand him until the timer ran out and win that way, which is what task videos do. And guess who else got added to this game? Our good friend Hugo. Hugo is a bottom 1 character with a lot of issues of his own. He's a beautiful boy with Ultra Throw, and Ultra Throw was a grounded launcher. And like all good scientists, we mix things together and see what happens. And unfortunately for Gil, Ultra Throw restands. This effectively means you can win off of 1 Ultra Throw in neutral. What this also means is that you can combo into SBD, and subsequently 720. Unlike other characters though, Hugo didn't need to stun or kill to get his restand infinite. This is on top of the fact that Resurrection Infinite still existed clearly, and for some characters, post-stun restand infinites as well. As a quick side note, they do exist in Third Strike, but only with Ibuki. She gets a Resurrection Infinite, but that's about it. It's not important to look over, and is an actual oddity in what is already a fairly big oddity.
Well, that is it from us. If you enjoyed this video, go send some love to Heather on Twitter. She's constantly posting weird fighting game oddities like this, and if we ask nicely enough, we might be able to get her to come back one day. I hope you're all doing well, and have a great day.